So that's why the particles can be more helpful for the sourcing rather than just field from the geometry. Okay, so another thing we can add here is velocity, and it's important stuff because many of my students, when they came to version 17, they get, okay, so where is our fluid source? In later versions, in earlier actually versions like 16, 16.5, we had a fluid source node which allow us to set up our noise, density, temperature, and velocity, and visualize this velocity, which is very important because velocity visualization, especially in fields, is not just simple visualization. Like for my points here, we can type, just press velocity and you can see those velocities if we have those. But again, if you have a particles, well, we can add this velocity over here to my particles and look on those velocity before we send them into the fields. So let's do this. We can do this again, as I know this in Houdini. I can tell this almost always when we work in Houdini. We can do this by few different ways, so because we have a lot of different ways here in Houdini for creating a lot of elements. So we can go and set the attribute warp, because you can work with attribute wrangle and add a noise here, but I prefer to use an attribute because it's much easier to add noise using this. And add some curl noise, because I prefer to use the curl noise for velocities because it creates nice, curly stuff here. And is a position, and use this noise for velocity. You can turn on velocities over here. Oops, not to force, for velocity. Yep. And set this to the output. We can use the fit range to control the maximum and minimum for my velocity, etc., etc. So now we can go back to attribute warp, and we have all those settings for velocity. So now we can see that we have a velocity, because we can press this button to show our velocities, and now this vectors. But again, we have a nice tool calling the point velocity. Point velocity. Come on, here we go. Point velocity, and we have some setup over here which allow us to apply a velocity very, very fast. So we can drive velocity from the object, from the motion of the object. Canonical noise, but again, my favorite, well, I like to use is curl noise. So just press this button and we should to have our noise. So the same setup like we did in the point attribute, in the attribute warp, but it's much easier, and it has some preset up. So we don't need to think about that. So we have initialization, compute for deformation, keeping coming, set to value from attribute. So there is a lot of different settings we can have, or we can just add velocity like a directional velocity. So like in vertical, like 10, and plus to this velocity, I will add some noise. Okay, well, 10 is too much, like 2 maybe, and add to this direction noise. Again, we can do this very simply with the attribute warp, but we need to spend like a minute for this. We just add a point velocity over there and we have it. So now we can go to our volume rasterize attributes and just press space and V for a velocity. So now after that, we're going to have 3 different fields: density, temperature, and velocity. And you can see that this field is vector field, vector 3s. This means that it's vector field. Go to the .NET, let me just rename it because .NETwork is very ugly. So smoke sim, and go to volume source. Now let's hit smoke source. To get more interesting names, we need to know where is what. Okay, so plus another one field, and we need to say that it's not a scalar field, it's vector field. The source is v. By default, v is an attribute of velocity for the points for geometry, but from field we need to have field called val. So we have velocity here, but this field should have the name val. So that's a huge difference between this. So if we have like a field to field, now this field is v, but we need to send this field into val, velocity. Oops. And again, additive operation. I want to add this velocity in each frame, and let's see how it's looking for now with our velocities. So now we have the smoke is rising up very quickly, much faster than it was because we use velocity. All right, so now it's push our density field from the source. So this velocity is existing just inside of my source. We can look on that, how our velocity is applied to our simulation. Can go to smoke object, and it's very interesting stuff that we can visualize each field, well, if we have this field separately. So let's say I can set up the temperature. I just need to, okay, here we go. That's my temperature. So it looks like a fire, but in fact, this nice reddish gradient just show me the hotter and the coolest areas in my simulation. So we can see how our temperature is dissipate. Okay. And what I want to see a velocity. So now velocity, we can see here the huge velocities over there. Let me just go to velocity and increase the range a little bit, because we have a maximum range just 1 by default. Let's set to 3 or 5 to get a nicer gradient, because when it's all in red, it's not very useful. So we can see that we have some velocities over here on the source. Without that, if you can remove this, we can see that we have velocities just from advection. So velocity is created just with temperature. So there is no initial velocity in my source. Okay, so we can definitely look on that. Control D, and now again here, so you can see our velocity there. So the same thing is, if we go to my source, we can back, if you say, okay, my velocity is not too big, I can increase it. You can simply go here and say, all right, I want a bigger scale for my velocities, for my noise, let's say. And now you can see it's more randomly, and push duration, let it be here, and spindle size a little bit bigger, or not. I like it. I like how it was. Maybe 3, and now it should be a very noisy. And said, all right. Now let's play again. Come on. Let's play with you. I want you to visualize my density back. So we already saw that velocity is here, and go to density. And look at my simulation now. It's true. Have a lot of curl noise here in the source. And you can see that all the stuff we create just change something inside of the source. So I not make change here inside of Pyro, so there is a lot of different settings. We will cover this later, but I'm not changing here nothing except of the source, because we have a different fields. We add the temperature, add the velocity, and now we can see that our simulation is dramatically changes from that simulation we had in the first stage, when we have just this tiny, smooth, white mushroom. Now it's looking like a smoke. It's definitely look like smoke. The noise, the movement, swirling stuff. I like it. Well, maybe not my best simulation, but all the stuff we did just with this source, which is, as for me, very good. So let me just make it a little bit smaller for the scale, and maybe keep this to, should be good. Using location, calculate with turbulence, grain. If you want to add more details, you can add a grain here, biggest in 0.5. So that's why points is better for use for now That's why our Pyro source which is a new tool, using the points for that. Okay, so we can create those points with different types, or you could create those points inside of Pyro source if you want to. Well, I prefer to do this here. All right, so you can play with the velocities, you can play with different setups, and then just rasterize this into the fields. So another thing I want to copy here again, it's a division size, and always paste it here, paste relative references. So that's what we have. Oops, not you. I just want to press my camera. And we have a nice simulation. It's take a while for now because it's grab a lot of voxels. Well, not too much, but you know, for the real time, like 1 million voxels, that's not too many. You can see that there's a lot of different fields we create. Well, not we, but Solver creates for simulation. The pressure, velocity, density, temperature. So we set density, temperature, and velocity, and the pressure is a field created by the Pyro Solver. There's a lot of different fields you can see here, but many of these we will control and look on and create some fire simulation. But for smoke, I guess that all that we need to have for now. What field? Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about those nodes, how we can apply some setups here, and how we can change those parameters to make our simulation even better.